Welcome to the Free Marketeers, the official podcast of the Free Market Foundation.
Hello, listeners. This is the latest edition of the Free Marketeers podcast. I'm joined by Chris Hattingh and Martin van Staden. Jumping straight into it, I thought we could talk about the national minimum wage, given the jobs numbers that came out this week, plus an article that was on Business Live from from some of the proponents of the minimum wage. So, Chris, I know that you read some of the article. What's your thoughts on that?
So the authors are trying to caution against inferring that the job losses are caused by the minimum wage. They want to make clear that, for example, the 15,000 domestic workers who lost their jobs is not necessarily a direct correlation. And they also make a technical point you would know better than I would with your math skills. But they say that the 20 Rand per hour, it's not the same as some people who say 3,500 Rand per month. They say it's not the same thing to talk about these things, even though it works out to the same amount. So to them, that's how they differentiate these things. They think the 20 Rand per hour, I don't know, justifies it, that kind of thing. There is also, they mention the kind of, I don't know if it's a way of getting out of any potential blame or responsibility, but they talk about how there could be other factors as well. They also say that you shouldn't just assume that because this thing was introduced, it caused it kind of thing. So that's sort of their way of addressing it indirectly, I suppose. Maybe they're trying to get out of it in some way, because we know the job losses the unemployment figures keep rising and rising. It's now, the expanded definition is 38%, which is insane. Almost 10 million people unemployed. And if you think about how big a portion of that includes people who have stopped looking for work as well. So it's not like people are just sitting at home not trying to find work. Yeah. And they just, between them and employers, people can't employ them because of all the labor legislation. So that's just my sort of initial take on the article.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And on the 20 Rand per hour story, I think he was just saying that some people will not work there 44 hours a week.
Oh, okay.
So he was just saying that. But I mean, I think the article was less interesting than the fact that it was written, that he was trying to justify something that, when you read the article itself, there's not a lot of depth there. There's no new information. It's just reiterating that arguments that were made during the minimum wage debate, and it's just asserting that I'm not. There isn't anything that proves that I'm wrong yet. You don't have any evidence that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Even though these job losses are here, you don't have any proof that I'm the guy who caused the problem. Saying that, and I think it's fair to say that they are the people who caused the problem, because Professor Valodia and David Francis, the people who wrote the article, one chaired the panel that came up with the minimum wage, and the other one was the head researcher. And so I think it's fair to blame them for the consequences of the policy that they championed.
Yeah.
So Martin, what do you think about the minimum wage, perhaps more in general than rather in this specific article?
Yeah, well, I think it's a wonderful coincidence, and I mean, these coincidences happen very often, that 15,000 domestic workers would suddenly, in this quarter, lose their jobs just in time for the minimum wage to come into operation. I mean, geez, who would have thought that something like that would happen? I mean, the cosmos is probably trying to tell us something. But no, actually, I agree. It's not just the minimum wage. There's also the carbon tax, the sugar tax, the multitudes of new regulations being introduced daily, of course, all the already existing labor legislation. So yes, I agree with these authors. We cannot just blame the minimum wage, and I'm glad they understand that it's a broader government problem, that government's intervention in the economy is far broader than just the minimum wage. And I'm glad that they've seen the error of their ways, and that they now agree that the government should no longer strangle the economy to death. So I'm really glad to see that. But of course, the idea that we cannot just blame government for stuff like job losses and economic downturns is of course nonsense. As government in this country has intervened more in the economy, almost in direct correlation to that, the economy has gotten worse. Every time they say let's do more, economic growth has declined more. And the only example real obvious example that we have where South Africa's economic growth skyrocketed just again coincidentally happened to be when apartheid ended and these control boards and a lot of economic controls were lifted and government had a far smaller role to play in the economy, and then the economic growth rate went up, more people got jobs. But that's of course just a coincidence. There's no connection between these things, and like it's a bunch of it's magic basically that causes these things to happen so coincidentally. It's not like we've seen correlations and causations between government intervention, government heavy-handedness, and excuse me, and the total suffering of ordinary South Africans under that heavy-handed regulation. So yeah, I'm glad that they understand it's not a one-dimensional issue. It's a whole host of government interventions in the economy that is causing this.
And one of the things that Professor Valodia says with David Francis in their article is that we can't just worry about unemployment. We have to also worry about equality, which I found illuminating, I would say, because it shows that how they are coming at this from the point of view that they want to equalize something. Doesn't matter those few thousands or millions of people who end up losing their jobs, as long as this equality is achieved. And so, how do I suppose it's worth it, Chris. I mean, if we're all equal at the end of the day, even if we are all poor, I suppose it's worth it.
Well, isn't that the ultimate dream of any socialist authoritarian utopia, is that we're all equal? So then there's nothing to aspire to, no one to lord their wealth over anyone else, because we know that how flashy richer people are with their wealth. They like to rub it in our faces, that kind of thing, and that makes us all feel inadequate and without dignity. It's not about the own wealth we create for ourselves. It's all about what someone else has. I think, that sort of thing, I would go as far as saying 99%, if not 100% of legislation is aimed at bringing certain people down, at bringing stuff down. It's aimed at equalizing things because the government thinks any inequality is wrong. It doesn't look at the cause of inequality. Just because we're free market advocates, I don't think any of us would say that in a completely free market system, everyone will have a job. It's not a case of jobs just raining down. It's a case of what the market wants, the supply of labor, the supply of goods and services, and then the demand for those things. But the fact is that people should be free to, move jobs, to get new jobs, to improve their skills, all this sort of stuff. And it should be easy for businesses to employ them. But it makes sense that sort of ideology is driving this kind of thing. And they hide behind these buzzwords. With the Airbnb regulation, for example, they talk about they're worried about the impact of short-term rentals on the traditional guest houses. What about those jobs? As though jobs are forever guaranteed, and I should always have a current job. It's not about performance or what I actually offer the customer. So to me it makes sense, that ideology of inequality.
Just to paraphrase the Bible, what does it profit you to gain 50 jobs if you lose 100,000?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good one. No.
So moving on to the president. So apparently this week South Africa got a new president elect. So Parliament met for the first time, and surprise of surprise, they elected Cyril Ramaphosa as the new president-elect.
Jeez, that was unexpected.
Going against all expectations.
I was holding thumbs for Julius Malema, but that's just me.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. So what do you guys think? Do you see any prospects for changes? With the news also that his deputy in the ruling party won't be joining parliament. So I heard somewhere that he might not be able to take up his post as deputy president. So maybe you could also comment on that, Martinez, because I think it's a constitutional issue or something.
Yeah, so on that specifically, the president actually doesn't have to appoint a deputy president. There is no constitutional requirement for there to be a deputy president. The only requirement that there is that if the deputy president is appointed, that person must be a member of the National Assembly. Now, it has been conventional for us to have deputy president, so I'm sure he will appoint someone, but I think the point on that is that he has time, so there's no real rush on that. David Mabuza could still become our deputy president in a month, 2 months, so that's not really an issue.
Sorry, Martin, I was just going to say, but the government talks about job creation, so surely they want to fill these posts as much as possible and create even more positions.
Yeah, well, on that, I mean, we've since when was the ANC's national conference? December 2017.
Mm.
We've heard about this new dawn, this cutting back on the size of government, cutting the excess fat, cutting the civil service, cutting departments, cutting, so that we can allow the economy to breathe a little bit. Yeah, that's apparently the mandate that Cyril Ramaphosa was waiting for. Now he has his mandate. I am definitely not going to hold my breath, because I will die if I do that, because nothing is going to happen. I can guarantee it. There will be more talk about corruption. There will be more job summits. There will be economic growth summits. There will be inequality summits and summits and summits and conferences and consultations and task teams and councils and all these things. And we will still continue to introduce new regulations, new laws. Every time the FMF brings up this idea, hey, here's a solution, step back and allow people to solve their own problems because you're currently hindering them from doing that, we get laughed at. So unfortunately, I don't see this past election as having any kind of real consequence for where South Africa is going, with the exception that it may have made it worse, given that expropriation without compensation is now within constitutional reach of the governing alliance between the green and the red parties. So there's that. I don't really see much change now that Cyril Ramaphosa is. I guess this is his first term as president. I'm not actually sure how this will be calculated, but he's been president for a year already. Now, I don't know if that is going to change anything. I highly doubt it. But again, I am the cynic at the FMF. I may not know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, what do you guys think?
If we weren't cynics, we wouldn't be working here, I think, in some ways. So at least we have jobs due to things being so difficult at the moment in South Africa. Just what you mentioned on the FMF being sort of laughed at, and spoiler warning for those listeners who haven't yet watched the final episode of Game of Thrones. But so now this is your spoiler warning. So please, either pause, go watch and come back.
Pause now, and if you haven't watched it,
at least we're putting a spoiler
Yeah.
warning. But when at sort of near the end, after Jon has killed Daenerys, and the lords and ladies are meeting to talk about a new king, that whole story, and then Samuel proposes the idea of democracy, and they all laugh at him.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. We're Samuel at the table.
Yeah, we make the obvious proposal, and everyone just looks at us in silence, and they're like, "Ha! In your dreams."
So there you go. The politicians in Parliament, they talk about reforms and economic growth and job creation, but then when you propose real solutions, they just laugh at you. So what are you going to do? Further on a sort of a broader point, I don't think things will really change because there's no system or philosophy change. It's the continued idea that the state should be at the center and that the state should continue helping us. We have NHI coming, as Martin mentioned, expropriation, all these things where the state is at the center because they want to help us, they want to give us land, they want to give us houses, etc., etc. So none of this will change. I really don't foresee that overnight.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think every major party, at least of the top three now, is now talking about a capable state.
Yeah, I think you're correct. Yeah. Why not? I mean, that sort of idea has entrenched itself. There's nothing, maybe around the world, I don't really see any, even America, which is held up as the capitalist free market beacon, maybe in the past, but even now it's just very much assumed that it's not about the system and the role of the government, it's just about who's in charge. So it's always going to be a case of my guy versus your guy, or my tribe versus your tribe, and that's going to lead to the same problems over and over.
Yeah, there's an interesting constitutional point here in that if you go back in history and look at the point of a constitution, it's literally to incapacitate the state. That is literally the role of a constitution. It says that, okay, we recognize that governments have always existed, kings, dictators, chiefs, warlords, whatever, and now we are adopting this instrument that cuts them off at the knees and makes sure they are only capable of doing certain things. Now that has been totally perverted in recent years. I mean, the United States Constitution is an example of a constitution that tried to pit arms of government against each other, different levels of government against each other, so that they would be at war with each other, not at war with the people. Now that's been flipped on its head, with the federal government having substantially more power than it was ever envisioned for it to have. And in South Africa, of course, we have this silly idea of cooperative governance, and moreover cooperative federalism as opposed to competitive federalism. And this is all about, we need to make sure all arms of government work together towards the common good. That is constitutionally and jurisprudentially, I would say, totally absurd. That's not the point, that why we have a constitution, especially of our apartheid history. So yeah, it's a funny thing that the parties that sing the loudest songs about constitutionalism, and yeah, we need to respect the constitution and its spirit, and then they would talk about, we need a competent state, we need a developmental state. It's like, no, we do not want a competent state. We want we want a competent state. We do not want a capable state. We don't want the state to be capable of doing whatever it wishes. For example, now the Law Reform Commission is proposing basically banning pornography. And we thought the Constitutional Court already said that you can't do that. But anyway, those are the types of things that the Constitution never envisaged the government should be engaged in. So no, we shouldn't be calling for an omnipotent state that can do whatever it wants. And it's funny that especially one party, which shall not be mentioned, which prides itself on a dedication to constitutionalism, the Constitution, the rule of law, is also falling in with this flawed philosophy, as you said, Chris, of just placing the state at the very center of everything and just forgetting about, hey, there's civil society which is also capable of looking after itself.
Now, on a related point, maybe we could also talk about another phenomenon that we are seeing in the 6th Parliament. I think I've seen a lot more young people than I saw in the 5th Parliament, and a lot of them come from the fees must fall background. Any comments, guys? Whoever wants to can take this.
Geez, that's a tough one. Yeah, fees must fall, to me, is a very sort of nihilistic school of thinking. It's very much about breaking things down in the name of transformation, decolonization, but the methods employed are very, the ends justify the means in a way. So whatever you have to do to get there is justified. So now you think about, if some of these people get into higher rungs of power, what they'll envision for the country. As we say, the common goal. Who is to say that any parliamentarian or politician knows what each person in a society's goals are? That's the other thing. We have this idea of a common goal, but there's actually no such thing.
So surely what we need, Chris, is just to get young people in there to fix things.
Well, yeah.
With their new young ideas.
It's funny that you mentioned that as well, because if you look at some of their ideas, they're actually very old-fashioned. And not progressive, not radically transformative at all. They all are focused on increasing state power. They view problem solutions as using the mechanism of the state, not through grassroots, organic problem solving based on communities, based on community values, that kind of thing. It's all very top down, not from the grassroots up. It's not that the people at the bottom dictate what happens. It's going to be the people from the top. So let's give them time to get into running their different parties, and then I'm sure we'll see them using those powers as they see fit. But that's just, again, my cynical take on things. Maybe I'm more cynical than you, Martin. I don't know. Maybe that's an achievement.
Yeah, I doubt that. But just on fees must fall, I mean, the idea there was basically a redistribution of education. Like, I don't think in that whole campaign any of them said fees are this high because there's a limited supply of universities. We therefore need to open up the market so that more universities could be established, so that prices could come down. And nobody said that. They basically said, okay, we have 21-ish traditional universities in this country. That is how many we'll ever have. That is how many we have ever had. And we need to make sure that that limited pie is shared more equally and more equitably. Well, that's so silly. I mean, when I went to Nigeria a few years ago, every second building was a university of something. I mean, I was astounded by it. And I mean, you see the same thing in the United States. It's relatively simple to establish a private college. There isn't such a thing as like a rules saying that you may not call yourself a university like we do in South Africa, or you may not call your employees professors like we do in South Africa. There, they have at least realized that, wow, a good way to bring down education prices is to open up the market for education, which we absolutely have not done here. So yeah, we're taking these people with this redistributionist mindset, which is not a new mindset, as you mentioned, Chris, and we're now putting them in parliament. And that goes to my second point. This did not just fall out of nowhere. This was another creation of the media, and the media tends to come up with relatively kooky ideas every now and then, which are usually besides the point, if I might say it, like this education thing, and then also like corruption. I want to say corruption is irrelevant, but the media makes corruption the number one issue in South Africa when it most assuredly is not the number one issue in South Africa. But on that point, I think it goes to show how much power the middle class really has, which they do not realize they have. The media wants clicks, wants reads, wants people to buy their newspapers from usually the middle class. And for them to do that, they need to say things that the middle class wants to hear. And for some reason, whether it's true or not, the middle class wants to see young perspectives. They write letters saying we need more young people in parliament. And shazam, here we go. We have the result of that. Every single big party is now obsessed with filling its ranks with young people, irrationally so. There is nothing better in a young person than an older person. Let me tell you, there's really no difference. They're just one is just older and one is just younger. There's no ideological difference necessarily there. So the media, the middle class, has a lot of power which they are not conscious of. And if you're listening, the chances of you being in the middle class are quite high. And my advice here is be conscious of the power that you have and use it right, and advocate for liberal ideas, for a restrained state, for a more tolerant society. And the moment you're conscious of this power that you have, you can filter that through to the media, and the media will filter it through to the government. And as we see, government is very concerned with its image in the media, and it will take action. But for as long as liberals, free marketeers, individualists remain quiet, as we mostly do, we'll continue to be at the receiving end of the stick, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good place to leave it. Do you want to give us the social media information, Martin?
Hey, Martin, before you do that, just for the listeners, next week, Wednesday, in the evening, Sikunati Manchancha from the Financial Mail is coming to give a talk here at the FMF. If you'd like to come and attend and get some more information, please just go to our website, which Martin will give you, and then just register there. I think it's going to be very well attended. So please RSVP as soon as you can. I think it's going to be a very interesting talk. He writes he writes, I think, twice weekly, or at least once a week for Financial Mail and other places. So I really like the work that he puts out, and I'm looking forward to it myself.
Yeah, I think he's talking about opening up the economy to small businesses and entrepreneurs. So please come and see us here at the FMF next week. So please subscribe to this YouTube channel. It's the big red button right under the video. Follow us on Twitter. It's at FMF South Africa, one word, and like us on Facebook. That is Free Market Foundation South Africa. Or it's Free Market Foundation South Africa, not Southern Africa. We do tend to mix these things up, unfortunately. Or in the URL, it's facebook.com/FMFSA. And of course, remember to visit our website. It's www.freemarketfoundation.com. Cheers.